she's here now. Great.
So I think we can get started if she's here.
Yes, go ahead. Great.
All right. Good evening to everyone. Welcome to this season's episode of the Global Debate Series. Thank you so much for making it today to everyone, whoever is able to join. Thank you so much. My name is Adele Frugundana. I work with iDebate Rwanda, an NGO that uses debate as a tool to prompt public speaking and critical thinking skills. We are firm believers that public discourse can solve so many of the ongoing conflicts. We run regional and international programs, but we're not gonna get into much details for the sake of time. So before we begin our debate, I would like to ask if we can get some opening remarks from our friend partner, Jim from Seattle University.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm really glad to be having this debate today. I guess, should I introduce our debaters real quick, or?
You can, but they also get time to introduce themselves.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm very proud to have Alyssa and Stacy participating. Alyssa is a recent grad of our program. Stacy's a current debater on our program. And I just think this is a great program to have these kind of debates. And I'm very appreciative of you folks participating in this and providing this offer for us. So thank you very much. And I hope everybody enjoys the debate.
Thank you too. If the debaters from the proposition side could introduce themselves and the opposition right after.
Yeah, hi, I'm Alyssa. I'll be the first speaker for the proposition side. I use they, them pronouns. I just graduated from Seattle University, so I'm very excited to be debating with you all today. Thanks for having us.
Hi, I'm Stacy. I'm a junior at Seattle University, and I'm really excited for this debate, and good luck to everyone.
The opposition side can introduce themselves now.
Hi, my name is Rami, and I recently graduated from Green Hills Academy High School, and I'm looking forward to debating with everyone. I'm the second speaker from the opposition side. Good luck to everyone.
I have no idea why I can't figure this out. Hi, I'm Kenzo. I'm from the opposition side. I'm also a recent graduate from White Dove Global Prep. And I'm honored to be here. Thank you. With my camera. Okay, it's on now, I think.
Yes. Okay, so the debate can begin, and we are gonna have the first speaker from the proposition side. Each speaker is gonna have 6 minutes, and then 2 minutes for cross-examination, and then after that, we're gonna have the opposition reply speech for 3 minutes and the proposition reply speech for 3 minutes. And then after, we're gonna have the floor opening to the audience. And then right after that, we can close the debate. So if I could please get the first speaker from the proposition side, 6 minutes. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, if everyone is ready, then I will go ahead and get started here now. So I'll go ahead and start my timer. Because the United States has failed to repair historic harms that continue to produce ongoing harm, we stand in affirmation of the topic that this House believes that the U.S. should use the Truth and Reconciliation model to deal with its past. We have a few points of modeling that I think will clarify this debate. First of all, we think that the U.S. model of a TRC looks very similar to how Canada and Australia presented them. They present TRC efforts to reconcile with Indigenous populations. These have a few key components in them. The first is truth-telling by members of the community harmed, either in retrospect, telling about their elder stories, or in the current, telling about their personal experiences. Secondly, we think this looks like legislative or reconciliatory change via mandates to the government. So, for example, Canada provided reparations to its Indigenous communities, as well as mandates to share art from Indigenous communities. This is the type of reconciliation that we can expect, considering many of the perpetrators of genocide and harm in the United States are no longer alive or are no longer statutorily able to be prosecuted. Secondly, we don't think that this necessarily includes aspects of amnesty, but we also believe that this model in topic generally is not mutually exclusive with other forms of peacemaking and general reconciliation. We think that's important moving forward. Okay, now we'll get into our first of two contentions considering reparations. There's a few points of context that are important to consider for the United States here. The first is that the US is remarkably bad at reparations for communities that have either been physically or economically harmed. The key case study and really only example of reparations awarded in the United States is when 40 years after the fact, Reagan awarded $20,000 to every Japanese American person who had been interned. This did nothing to solve for their liquidated assets and really is a slap in the face to people who lost income for years and years. Secondly, we think that the US has seriously harmed its Indigenous communities, among other people. This has tangible impacts to this day. The lifespan on the Sioux Reservation is reduced to almost half of what the national US average is. Thirdly, we think that US criminal courts are not set up to give adequate reparations or justice. US tort law has punitive justice damages caps that cannot allow for systemic reform for communities that have been disenfranchised for so long. For example, in the United States, the limit for how much you can get in a punitive damage is $350,000. This is in no means enough to adequately even provide healthcare in the status quo for some of these populations, much less rebuild infrastructure, much less rebuild community around these types of things. What are the types of changes then that a Truth and Reconciliation Committee model provides? First, they allow for actual economic repair in a way that the US court systems physically cannot. Secondly, we think that they create a more dynamic solution and ignore these types of legal constraints, right? We're able to join in a form of community that the US adversarial legal system won't be able to provide for. We think that this has three really huge impacts in this round. The first is that we get physical and actual economic repair that stops cycles of poverty for communities. We look into case studies like Canada and Australia, under which families were awarded actual money that would not have been possible for them to get under the US legal system and the status quo. Secondly, we think that we get tangible justice for communities who have been harmed. The US tends to ignore and erase its history, and this is a way of getting it actualized and providing justice for harms that have happened up to hundreds of years ago. Thirdly, we think that we get institutional repairs to harm, looking into examples such as Canada, where Indigenous schools, boarding schools that Indigenous students were sent to were abolished. They were demolished and removed from social gain. These types of physical changes to the demographics of the United States can also be achieved under a TRC that wouldn't be able to be achieved in the legal context. Our second contention then is about the awareness. 2 points of context. We think that TRCs allow for honest truth-telling that the adversarial US court system does not. When lawyers are encouraged to perform zealous advocacy, either in the complete innocence or guilt of an individual, little attention and care is given to the delicate medium that exists within generational harm, conflict, and persevering tangible harms to community. Secondly, we think that genocidal and murderous United States policy has the mechanization of moving forward this conceit of hiding things from public awareness and sanitizing its history. We think this is examined really clearly in the current US opposition to things like critical race theory and teaching adequate history surrounding genocide of Indigenous populations. The United States finds itself clinging to individual stories when there are hundreds of examples of people who have collectivized around similar causes and similar harms that systemically the United States government has enacted. So what does the TRC allow for then? One, we think that it brings to public record and stops the sanitization of these types of genocidal policies. And that secondly, we get actual attention and focus from the United States government onto systemic harms. Then what are the impacts of this? One, we think that we get things like cultural survival. When people understand that the United States has actively worked to eradicate Indigenous culture, then we think that it's possible to reverse it, right? TRCs in Canada allowed for institutions to preserve languages of Indigenous communities and as well as advocate for perseverance of art, actors, and storytelling. This is the kind of advocacy that TRCs uniquely get to access. Secondly, we think that storytelling is a means of healing for marginalized and harmed communities. And thirdly, that we think the US government having to listen to the harms it's done leads to better policy, leads to interactions with people of those communities at a higher rate. That is my time. So thank you all for listening, and I'm ready for Crossfire.
Yes, thank you so much, Elisa. Can we have the cross-ex for 2 minutes now?
I would like to ask Elisa a question. So when you talked about the TRC allowing for honest truth telling and the opportunity for the truth to come out of all the crimes that have been committed against the Indigenous people, but I was wondering, where exactly is the truth going to come out of? As you mentioned, the people who were part of the perpetrators at the time already passed, so there's no chance for them to go to court and everything. So where is the truth going to come from? And the more collective stories instead of just individuals' stories.
Totally. That's a really important question here, because the United States is kind of a unique example. Unlike in South Africa, where living victims of types of violence were able to come forward, the United States, a lot of the direct genocidal harm happened up to a century ago. We think that the type of storytelling that can happen is either information that elders or ancestors have passed down, or, and probably more realistically, what is the situational harm that is still occurring to them in the United States? We think that in places like the Sioux Nation and the Sioux Reservation, this would look like storytelling surrounding the fact that the United States has banned or barred healthcare from getting into them, right? We think that this looks like telling stories about how they don't have access to grocery stores on many reservations. So these are things that are directly connected to the original genocidal instance where these people were forced onto separate land, forced into economic disparity, but they still continue to this day. And we think that addressing them and storytelling surrounding them is really important.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
All right. So now we're going to have the first speaker from the opposition side. 6 minutes.
I'm so sorry, my computer seems to have a problem turning on and turning off audio.
Kenzo, we can't hear you.
Okay, I'm so sorry for that. I have no idea what just happened.
Okay, you can start over. I can hear.
Okay, you can hear me now.
Yes.
Good. I don't know why I can't seem to turn on video. I have no idea what problem my computer has today. So the opposition has deemed that truth and reconciliation is overall an unfeasible method of dealing with a past as dark and heavy as the US is, whether we're looking at systemic racism against African Americans and indigenous people that have obviously put them at a disadvantage economically and socially, including other victims of US imperialism. Just sitting down and encouraging truth and reconciliation does nothing to the victims of these injustices that have caused structural and systemic harm to them. Therefore, having truth and reconciliation for people who definitely are not alive would be very difficult, sorry. Rather, we can have structural changes for these individuals rather than just having truth and reconciliation commissions. Also, truth and reconciliation commissions as a method of dealing with dark pasts, like in countries as seen as South Africa and Canada, have not proved to correct the injustices of apartheid in South Africa, as wealth inequality among white and colored South Africans is really high. As according to CNN, white South Africans earn nearly 3 times the average wage made by Black South Africans. In Canada, no obvious structural changes have been made, as months ago there was a policy, there were policies for oil drilling is still happening on indigenous lands. And so therefore the proposition has truly not proved that truth and reconciliation is a solely feasible model for dealing with structural and systemic injustices. Thank you very much. I yield my time.
Okay, thank you so much, Kenzo. Now we're gonna have the cross-ex again for 2 minutes.
Hi, I've got some questions for you. I guess my first one is that I think that you're completely correct to identify the fact that, oh, sorry.
No, I'm saying you're asking me.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I believe so. Yeah, totally, no worries. So I believe that you're completely correct to identify the fact that things like racial sentiment in post-apartheid South Africa didn't go away simply because of truth and reconciliation committees. But I really don't understand kind of the offensive component of that argument. So how did truth and reconciliation committees make any of those situations worse in any of those countries?
I'm saying they did nothing to technically fix them. I never said they made anything worse. They never did anything to technically fix them, since that's what they're there for. So yeah.
Yeah, and then for your Canada example also, I suppose, although there weren't systemic changes, which I think you're fair to identify, right? Environmental, racism, et cetera, still existing. Millions of dollars were appropriated to Indigenous communities, as well as art centers, cultural centers, language centers. Do you think that these things contribute to helping those communities, or that they are a lack of structural or at least tangible change?
They are a form of tangible change, but they never overall fix these structural and systemic changes, which is overall what is important, to remove these structures rather than just giving people cultural centers or et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And then I suppose my final question, I guess, is that if we, in the United States, I guess, if we look into the kind of way that the court system generally looks like, how would it be possible to remove structural harms and institutional harms under their model?
So overall, our plan was to pretty much oppose truth and reconciliation, but as a sole model to fix these problems. But overall, I think funding these communities, education systems, and et cetera, and giving these communities opportunities to come up and rise rather than just putting these people in committees and things like that. So things like removing property taxes as a means to fund education would help African American communities to be able to to be able to get schools that are provide better education for them and setting probably state standard, country standards for education, et cetera, rather than just putting people in courts. And yeah, so legislation, I think, is what we're looking at.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Now we're gonna have the second speaker from the proposition side.
I'm just going to get my timer set up and then we'll go. All right. I want to thank everybody so far. It's been an amazing debate. In my speech today, I'm first going to talk a little bit about our model and our goals today within this debate. I'm going to rebuild our case a little bit, and then I'm going to move into a few points of refutation, and then I'm going to bring up 2 new points that I would like to make aware within our debate. So to go back through our case so far, which is this House believes that the Truth and Reconciliation model is important in undoing, in working towards or against racism within the United States. We find that this is really important because you can't dismantle systemic and structural racism within a day. And you also can't dismantle that within a population that simply doesn't care, doesn't bring that to the forefront. So the first thing in making any change is to change the population's mindset, their perception. So in order to do this, the truth-telling model really brings to light the experience of people who have struggled under this system of oppression, and also brings a sense of empathy and realness, brings out the neighborly emotions within people who live in a community but don't necessarily understand or see. They don't see that struggle, that visibility. So truth and reconciliation is really about bringing visibility to the United States' very racist and very oppressive, harmful system, and acknowledging it instead of sweeping that under the rug. So to move into my refutation, the opposition argued that Truth and Reconciliation does nothing for victims within the system and not in an immediate structural change. We would argue, as I said before, that Truth and Reconciliation is the first step that it takes to change these overwhelming systems that literally have racism built within its structure. When we look at the United States Constitution, the legal system, education systems, we see that racism has been built in there since its inception. So to undo that takes just so much overwhelming effort. And the first step to do that is to bring visibility and light to these issues to make people actually care. So to bring into my new points of material is that currently we depend on this idea of white guilt as the contributing factor to undoing these racist systems. And I would argue that white guilt is unreliable and often works as a backlash against moving forward with undoing racist systems. We see this in the way that white people of privilege within education communities and politics. It's very hard to accurately look at the United States history to accept that without flinching, without looking away, without wanting to change the discourse or to mitigate the harms of it. So we see within the United States education system a very sort of revisionist history, sweeping under the rug the actual truth of the atrocities that were committed. We see incorrect portrayals of Indigenous people and people who were taken captive from Africa and forcibly brought into slavery within the United States. Within the United States, educational understanding of even Africa as a continent and their history is woefully just incorrect and misrepresented. So you're looking at a population that has no framework, has no correct mindset to even deal with a giant continent, an entire history of a people. We only, the United States education system only sees this through a tiny little microcosm. Furthermore, with this backlash, we can see this directly in the case of the presidential elections, from when we went to Obama, which the United States political system basically said, oh, racism is over, we have a Black president. And the very next president that was elected can be considered one of the most dangerous and openly racist presidents after that. President Trump was a direct backlash against a move forward for people of color and that advancement for people within the political system. So we see that when we try to bring to light, when we try to make these, when the United States tries to make these efforts towards good, there's an immediate and vicious white backlash because, in fact, of that guilt and not wanting to look at that history and take responsibility for it. My last point is that, as my partner brought up before, is generational trauma. So we see generations of people being born, people of color being born into systems that don't support them. They're born into places that don't provide adequate health care, access to education. And so it's systemic. It goes on and on, it self-perpetuates itself without recognizing this, without making a conscious effort to understand and undo those systems. We have people who are born again and again into this same cycle of poverty, abuse, and racism. Thus, it is important to side with our position that TRC, or Truth and Reconciliation Model, is intrinsic and important in undoing racist systems within the United States. Thank you so much. That's my time. Good luck, everyone.
All right, thank you so much, Stacy. So we're gonna have the cross-ex for 2 minutes again.
Is there someone doing a cross?
Me. I'm so sorry. I have no idea what happened again. So I have a question. So how do you expect the US to be this receptive of truth and reconciliation when you've already said that white rage exists for these, whenever any kind of equity or fixing of any injustices is being examined? Because we've seen it with critical race theory, where they go to schools and they protest, etc., etc. You know, this keeps happening. So how exactly do you expect to bring this about with the white rage in America existing?
So the Truth and Reconciliation Model is essentially about the government accepting and advancing truth-telling and a truthful understanding of history. So by doing that, we essentially are trying to undo these long-held racist perceptions, and it is not easy. And there is a lot of backlash, and I guess that's the point: is that until we deal with these issues on a government and educational level, until we accept that as fact, there's no chance to change anybody's mind and advance any situation. Essentially, you can't change people's mind when they are so against it from the beginning, when they don't have that education, when the government denies history. So by Truth and Reconciliation, we're saying that yes, the government and education systems are accepting these histories, are not changing history books, are not changing the dialogue. And so finally, we have ground to stand on to deal with racist individuals and systems.
Okay, so how exactly do you expect the government to like recognize these? Because these people are voting in the same politicians who oppose this rhetoric. It's not like, you know, they're just individuals, and then the politicians or the government are just like, okay, for us, we're not going to portray the ideals of the people. So yeah, how do you expect the government to accept?
Currently, there's definitely a sense of ignoring and downplaying Indigenous peoples and communities of color. So that is the real problem. We don't talk a lot about Indigenous peoples or engage with them in a realistic way politically. Indigenous people are forced onto reservations. Essentially, it seems like, oh, you're a person in a zoo almost, instead of like a living, breathing member of our communities and our government. So by dealing with those issues, by not being able to ignore them, by saying, no, everybody deserves their vote, everybody has their say, that's kind of the first step. So this is a very like heady, abstract argument. I will totally concede that, but to support this, move towards it, and to stop basically ignoring and pushing people to the side, changing the discourse. Like these are integral changes that we need to see within our society.
All right, thank you so much, Stacey. Now we're gonna have the second speaker from the opposition side.
Hi, my name is Faith Turami. My video. Second, yes, here you go. So my first point that I want to bring forward is that the Truth and Reconciliation model, it's more theoretical than practical, because all these points that have been brought forward by the proposition side, talking about how they're going to bring up bring forth the indigenous culture and like give them a chance for reparations and bring forth the indigenous culture, the arts that have been lost and everything, especially with the black people who have been hurt, and like you're trying to solve the problems that have been the problems of the black people. I think it's more theoretical than anything else, because first of all, it requires the government support, which is something that the Truth and Reconciliation models in other countries have always lacked. For example, we see in South Africa, there was a Truth and Reconciliation model after the apartheid, but as brought forth by many of the South Africans and victims, it was proven that the government was ignoring the problems. It was ignoring the people who are part of the problem, who brought the perpetrators. It was ignoring some of the victims, because according to how the Truth and Reconciliation model is set up, it targets specific stakeholders. So as I was saying, this Truth and Reconciliation model is theoretical more than practical, because unless you have government support, you will not be able to accomplish anything other than digging up the past. So the question here is it worth it to dig up the past of the crimes against the indigenous people and the black people if there's no real change that's going to be brought forth, which we have seen in other countries that the TRC does not do much. Even America itself was proven, as in the time of the Japanese Americans, they were only given $20,000 in reparation money, and that's not a real change. So is it worth it to bring up all this to dig up the past and try to find out what happened and the truth when there's no real change that's going to happen? So my second point is the TRC requires the TRC is targeting different stakeholders, which meaning there's, for example, the black people, and then there's the indigenous people and the reparation money and everything like that. So the Truth and Reconciliation model, if the people who are not alive, who are not part of this, the perpetrators are still not alive, then what real change can be brought forth by the Truth and Reconciliation model? Because the committee set up, it will not be able to dig up all the past that happened and find out the truth. So in doing so, some of the some of the histories lost, some of the histories even changed. So even rather than doing that, why not just bring forth another action that's actually feasible, or another action that's going to matter more. So and then there's also the fact that there is the political reasons that affect the TRC, in that sometimes the governments, for example, the US government might not want to give up the past, in that some people may have, some of the perpetrators may have been government officials or something like that. So that means the government may not be supporting the truth and reconciliation model. So then no real change will be happening, and the status quo will remain as it is. So in that, we believe that the truth and reconciliation model is not that effective, either in America or even in the other countries that we've talked about, be it Canada or South Africa. So and then my last point would be about the recommendations. So the recommendations of the truth and reconciliation model that are needed to be enacted, sometimes they're not enacted, or they're slow to be enacted. For example, I'll give an example of South Africa, when they talked about giving reparation money to different stakeholders, to different victims. Sometimes it took many years for that to happen. So the same thing would happen in the truth and reconciliation model if it was set up in America. How long would it take for the legislative changes to happen? How long would it take for the government mandate regarding the reparation money to be given to the victims and to the indigenous groups and the Black people? All these changes that were brought forth by the proposition, how long would they take to be enacted? So in that time frame, there's no real change. So that means the truth and reconciliation model will not be as effective. And that's why we do not believe it's that needed in the US. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Faith. Now we're going to have the reply speech from the proposition side. 3 minutes.
Is that me or you, Alyssa?
I think that's me. Sorry, I figured there was another crossfire. That was not me. So.
That's
Okay.
okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to mostly be rebuilding my case and then doing a few points of impact weighing. The first is to just kind of run down the speech that you just heard. The idea of this thing being more theoretical than practical is something to examine. First, I think that South Africa had broader issues that weren't inherent to the model of TRCs, such as offering amnesty randomly, such as to very high-profile people. Secondly, we think that our model was set up to be that this is government-based mandates, so we think that the government would in fact act, but there is an inherent tension between that and between the refutation that they provided. So one, they tell us there are better solutions, there are broader solutions, more action, more active work. But secondly, they tell us that the US government is going to reject even what they consider a minor action of a TRC. So I think that pretty much proves to me that they have no actual advocacy along the idea of is something too big or too small for the US government to approve of. Finally, we think that legislative change is far less likely to happen. The Japanese-American reparations were a result of 40 years of legislative work compared to TRCs, such as a place like Canada, which were enacted under a decade. Secondly, on the aspect of stakeholders being different or not alive, first, there is a myth here that I think is you can get the whole truth. We will never get the whole truth of what has happened to every single individual. Unfortunately, due to the genocidal nature of people, the best that we can do is get portions. We can only restore portions of cultures, restore portions of societies, right? However, people who are still suffering from the US government's actions deserve money, deserve compensation, and deserve to have their stories told. And then finally, I'm going to get into some kind of impact weighing on this sort of systemic harms here. South Africa obviously didn't get repaired entirely or fixed or restored. This is completely true after their TRC, but no single method can restore a complete country and a complete victimized population. The US legislative and court system, as we discussed in our case, has barriers from punitive damage caps to the adversarial court system that prevent them from providing normative solutions. A TRC, as Stacey said, allows for people in the United States who are often ignorant or apathetic to be engaged with people's stories, right? When we hear that the US is likely to reject. We talk about white guilt and white rage. This is true, but lots is based on ignorance. People saying things like slavery ended a century ago don't listen to stories of people who are still affected by the consequences of that. We think that people enacted both getting money and listening to those stories are more likely to encourage further systemic benefits and further helping things. On our side, we don't want to pretend that Canada funding the arts undoes genocide. It doesn't, but it enables people to get the ball rolling and stand up for more advocacy groups in the future.
All right, thank you so much, Elisa. So now we're gonna have the opposition side with the reply speech.
I'm sorry, is it our turn?
Yes, opposition side reply speech.
I'm so sorry. So to conclude, the opposition has deemed the Truth and Reconciliation model not a feasible solution to bring out systemic change that would actually benefit and correct the wrongdoings of the US government. As the US government and US society proves a very divided society, therefore, truth and reconciliation would be very difficult, as many are aware of these injustices. However, they choose to ignore them or are definitely proud of them. We will see this in different school board meetings against critical race theory, where they'll start saying Black people sold themselves, etc., etc. So it proves these people are aware. However, they do not want to bring about any systemic change. They want it to stay that way. Therefore, the opposition has decided that truth and reconciliation is definitely not the way to go in order to deal with the US's dark past. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much for the debaters. Now we're gonna have, the floor is open to the audience. It's your time to shine. If you have any questions, any points you want to add on, this is your time.
I guess, hi, my name is Loane, and I guess my question goes to affirmative. I wasn't there throughout the whole debate, but maybe we talked about it. But my question is, how feasible is the truth and reconciliation thing for a country as big as the United States? And then secondly, why would you think the government is the best actor when it is the one that's perpetuating Black people the most? So why would you choose the US as the actor, basically? Thank you.
For the I guess the second component of, or the first part of your first question, I think that in the US there probably would be, we didn't get into this specifically in the debate, but there would probably be separate truth and reconciliation committees and subcommittees for different populations, I would imagine, in different regions, because the type of things that happen to them are so different. And then for your second one, talking about the US government, I think that you're right. The US government is definitely guilty of perpetrating a lot of these things. I think that the two kind of main things are that, one, the government is frequently changing. So because we have different people in power than, say, when we set up the reservation system, they're likely to want to fix some of those things. And then secondly, the more pragmatic one is that they have all the money. So even though we think like a country like Canada, which has a really racist government, probably didn't want to give a bunch of money to Indigenous people, they did. They gave millions of dollars to Indigenous people. And I think that's something that's pretty unique to the government having. So yeah, thank you for the question.
I guess I would like to add on that if the government is sort of the highest level of agent within a country. So to expect a like a third-party group or a complete grassroots movement, it still wouldn't undo the systemic and structural racist fixtures within the government. Like, so it's important that it always happens at that highest level, and that's where we need to combat, where we need to have this truth and reconciliation. So it would always be most effective within the government.
I have a question for the opposition. So if the TRC just, doesn't work, there's all these kinds of societal issues that it doesn't address, what do you, and I guess Alyssa asked a bit about this, but what do you see as a better way to address these issues? What would work better?
I think addressing these issues would, I said legislation. So like I said, having people just recognize these things is not pretty much like enough, because it's kind of been proven most of American society is hard-headed, especially like they mentioned white rage. So I just think legislative change is overall more important. Things like police, what do they call it? De-arming the police, where we make sure that less African Americans end up in jail, making sure that there are less pipelines built on indigenous land, etc., etc. Because at the end of the day, there are profit motives to this. Giving cultural centers to indigenous people is really helpful, even though it helps recognize indigenous oppression and etc., etc. Sometimes it helps commodify people's cultures. So I think just letting people just do what they want without making sure that they have that there is equity and justice for these people is, in my opinion, not enough. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to ask the proponents. They support that US should use truth and reconciliation model to deal with its past. But don't you really think that it's kind of gonna be like despising the past, like the party governments or the presidents with their authorities? And also there are other issues that this truth and reconciliation won't solve. Because if we need to talk about this racism that is happening in American streets, truth and reconciliation won't solve that. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Stacey, if you want to go for it. Sorry.
Okay. The big part about truth and reconciliation is that it is the first step to that we need to take in order to change the narrative. So when we talk about, this isn't a legislative change, this isn't getting rid of a tax, this isn't that sort of thing. Like, it's important to realize that without changing anybody's perception, without undoing sort of the racist revisionist history of the United States, like there is no change. No one cares. Nobody pays any attention to it. That is the problem right now, is apathy and faulty or education with a lot of holes in it. So basically, all of anything that we're looking forward to for making a change, from understanding and supporting Indigenous communities to ending violence, police violence against people of color. Like all of this, it doesn't happen until people actually care. And so that sort of apathy, that ignorance, and even that like outright, racism against making this change, like that is what Truth and Reconciliation directly combats. And that is our biggest hurdle to overcome as the United States, is to change these perceptions. So that is how, Truth and Reconciliation is just, it's key, it's vital in changing anything within our government right now. Thank you. If you want to add anything, Alyssa, go for it.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking that if the topic was like the US should use TRCs to fix every single issue that they have going on overnight, then I think that me and Stacey would really completely drown in this debate. But I think that TRCs are, because there is no single system or plan that's ever going to repair centuries of genocide overnight, right? It's a slow process. And I think that TRCs uniquely offer the most money, the most mandates, and the most mindset shift of any single system. So yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. If there is anything Jim would like to say as we're closing.
I'm fine. Are we finished, or what do you mean?
Yeah, we're closing the debate. The debate is finished.
Oh, the debate's finished.
Yes.
Okay, I thought both sides did a great job, and I think it really goes to the heart of, either how much can CRT solve, or do they solve? I also have to say that the live transcription and how it is, at one point, I think it called it the Tooth Commission or something like that. So it was sort of funny watching that go by. But I think the debate really had some good clash about how much can any kind of effort really change people's attitudes and acknowledgement of things that they've done. And, to me, it sort of begs an additional question that, maybe a TRC or whatever the legislation efforts that the opposition presented, how do you structure things and communicate things to get people to change their minds and come together in opposition to racism and just treating people just horribly? And that, to me, I think is something that, sort of like if we want to go first step here, that would be a really good second step as part of any effort on these kinds of issues. But I want to thank the debaters. I thought they were great. I thought I'm real proud of my Seattle U debaters, and I thought the debaters from Rwanda were fantastic and had some really good points, and I thank everybody for participating.
Yes, thank you so much, Jim. And I think with the end of this debate, I would like to thank our debaters from both sides. You guys had an amazing, thoughtful, thought-provoking insight and arguments, which was really nice. And thank you so much for everyone for taking your time and making it to this event. And also thank you so much to the Seattle University for a great event. Next time, hopefully we meet in person. And yeah, thank you so much for this debate. It was really amazing. We're really excited. And I think my debaters are really happy now because of how they were really excited for this debate. Yeah. And don't forget to follow us on our social media, iDebate Rwanda. And yeah, I hope everyone has a wonderful day, rest of the day, and a wonderful night. And for the audience or any other one, you can put a comment in the message box, thanking all the debaters and, you know, giving them a thumbs up for a very good debate. Thank you, guys. And
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you all. Okay.
Thank you. Great job, everybody. I'm going to shut down the meeting. Take care, everybody.